Well, author and speaker Barbara Johnson wrote about a story about a young man who was eating at a McDonald's one day, and he noticed an elderly couple sitting down to lunch who had ordered just one meal and an extra drink cup. And as he watched, the gentleman carefully divided the hamburger in half and laid half in front of his wife. And then he counted out the fries, one for him and one for her, until each had half. Next, he poured half of the soft drink into the extra cup and set that in front of his wife. Well, then the old man began to eat while his wife sat watching, her hands folded demurely in her lap. Well, the young man walked over to the couple and gently asked if they would allow him to purchase another meal for them so that they didn't have to split theirs. "Oh, no," the gentleman replied. "We have been married for 60 years, and everything has always been 50-50. Well, then the young man turned to the wife and asked if she was going to eat. "Not yet," she replied. "It's his turn with the teeth." Isn't that great? You did not see that coming, neither did I, which is one of the reasons I started with this story. It's been a dozen years or more since I came across it, and I wanted to share this unexpected giggle. But I also think this story demonstrates what All Saints' Day is about. I mean, it's about relationships, about caring for one another, about sharing love with each other. Hebrews 12:15 says, in the Living Bible translation, it says, "Look after each other, so that not one of you will fail to find God's best blessings." Look after each other. I mean, that's what we celebrate today. Spouses, parents and children, siblings, friends, loved ones who have walked beside us in this crazy life. The ones who have looked after us and others so that not one of us fails to find God's grace. That's what All Saints' Day is about, a celebration of all the people of God. Well, Nadia Bolz-Weber reminds us that sometimes when we hear this word saint, we think of people with what seems like superhuman faith. But when we celebrate All Saints' Day, we are celebrating all on whom God has acted with the power of the Holy Spirit. We celebrate the fact that God creates faith in ordinary people, people who through ordinary acts of love bring the kingdom of heaven closer to earth. Of course, one tradition we have in the church is to remember our loved ones who have died, who have gone before us. And we know that many in our congregation this past year have lost spouses and children, nieces and nephews, many who were way too young, many who were spouses for 50, 60, and even 70 years. And when we remember them, we remember the promise of Jesus, that we will have life after this life. We remember that our story is a story of resurrection. And that's certainly one of the reasons why the reading of Lazarus being raised from the dead is a sign for All Saints' Sunday. It's a reminder of Jesus' power over death and the grave. And yet, this story isn't just a story about Lazarus. and the saving power of Jesus. It's also a story about the relationship between a brother and his sisters and their relationship with Jesus. And just consider Mary, whose heart is wrenched with grief, so much so that she collapses at Jesus' feet and cries out her lament, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." Mary is everyone who is here this morning with a heavy heart. The grief of your loss still fresh, even overwhelming. There is also Martha in the story, who at first voiced that same lament as Mary when she went out to meet Jesus as he approached Bethany earlier in the story. "If you had been here, Lord, our brother would not have died." But Martha has a different interaction with Jesus, one that transformed her grief into a courageous hope. When Jesus says to her, "Your brother will rise again," Martha confesses with a resilience of faith that says, "Yes, Lord, I believe you are the Messiah, the Son of God, and I know my brother will rise again." Martha is every person whose faith in Jesus seems incredibly resilient. She is both a witness and an encouragement for the rest of us. Now, I know at different times in our lives we will be Mary, and I believe that there are times when we will be Martha for each other. If you are Mary today, know that you are not alone. Your grief, your lament, it's real. But know that when Jesus sees you weeping, he weeps with you. And take strength in the Marthas in your life, the people who give you hope, who remind you that God is with you and will never fail you. People who hold on for you with strength and courage to the promise of God's grace and peace and everlasting life. And take heart, too, in this story of a man who was called from the tomb. For Lazarus is the promise of Jesus literally embodied, one whom death had taken, but who could not hold. But before we leave this story, there's one more character, or I should say characters, who I think help us understand what it means for us to be saints. It's the crowd. The crowds who witness Lazarus' resurrection and whom Jesus then commands at that very end of our story, unbind him and let him go. And this one statement is a reminder that we, who are witnesses to God's grace active in our world, we have a role to play. Unbind him and let him go. It's an invitation to recognize that Jesus' resurrection is not just a matter of the life to come, but it is also a matter of life now. As Hebrews says, look after each other so that not one of you will fail to find God's best blessings. So too, Jesus' command to the crowd is an invitation for us to be a part of God's life-giving work in the world now. And boy, do we have work to do. And yes, here in this place right now, we remember and we grieve and we celebrate the saints who have gone before us, who are now in the nearer presence of God. But also, here in this place, right now, we give thanks for the saints who are sitting right in front of you. Those who have heard the word of resurrection and now are called to go out into the world and unbind all who have been bound by fear, and to let go everyone who struggles to find hope. Our world is in pain. People are afraid of what they don't know, afraid of suffering, afraid of death. But we don't have to be afraid. As Dr. David Lowe says, in the light of God's resurrection promise, death no longer need terrify us. Not the death of our loved ones and not our own. But just as importantly, because of God's resurrection promise, the life we share in this world here and now should also no longer terrify us either. The massacre of innocents, the politics of fear and division, the rhetoric of hate, these are heart-wrenching elements of our life in this world, but they do not have the last word, and they are not the final reality. Prompted by God's resurrection promise, we can stand against them, hold on to each other amid them, and offer a testimony rooted in life, rooted in love, that runs contrary to the testimony of the world. The God who raised Jesus needs us, wants us, invites us to participate in God's resurrection world by caring for and standing with and lending our courage to everyone who suffers, who is grieving, all who are the most vulnerable or in need. Maybe it begins with sharing a lunch, 50-50. Oh, blessed saints, let's look after each other so that not one of us fails to find God's amazing grace. Thanks be to God. Amen.